There's a high chance that right now in your house, there's a bottle of Windex under the sink, Ziploc bags in a drawer, and maybe even a can of Raid in the garage. All of these things belong to one family, which is worth around $30 billion, running the same company for 140 years, 5 generations deep. And the craziest part is, you cannot buy a single share of this company. They've been telling Wall Street no for over a century, and the reason starts with a decision so reckless it should have destroyed them. Let's get into the $30 billion empire of S.C. Johnson. Chapter 1. The company hiding in your house. Let's start with how strange this actually is, because S.C. Johnson might be the biggest company you've never once thought about. Go stand in your kitchen and start reading labels. Windex, Ziploc, Saran Wrap, Scrubbing Bubbles, Pledge, Glade, Raid, Off, Drano, Shout, Mr. Muscle, Duck. Every single one of those is owned by the same family in Racine, Wisconsin, a company doing somewhere north of $10 billion a year across roughly 13,000 employees, selling in basically every country on Earth. You have almost certainly given this family money in the last month, probably without ever registering their name. That's the whole trick. They're everywhere in your life and invisible in your head. And here's the part that should stop you. A company that size, that dominant, that old, 140 years running, has never once gone public. There's no ticker symbol, no shares on the New York Stock Exchange, no hedge fund with a stake, no private equity firm circling, no quarterly earnings call where analysts grill the CEO about margins. If you wanted to buy a piece of the company that makes the Ziploc bags in your drawer, you simply couldn't. Not for any price. 5 generations of one family have owned the whole thing outright since 1886, and the current chairman and CEO, Fisk Johnson, is the great-great-grandson of the man who started it. So the obvious question is, how? Because staying private for 140 years isn't just stubbornness. It costs you money, it costs you growth, it's the harder road every single time. And the answer is genuinely fascinating, because when you line up the biggest decisions this family ever made, almost every single one is something a public company would have vetoed on the spot. A budget blown 5 times over. A CEO who vanished into the Brazilian jungle in a seaplane. A skyscraper that got condemned. But before any of that, the whole empire started with a guy who was selling something else entirely and accidentally stumbled into a fortune he wasn't even looking for. Chapter 2. The floor salesman who stumbled into a fortune. In 1882, a man named Samuel Curtis Johnson was going door to door in Racine, Wisconsin, selling parquet flooring, those fancy patterned wood floors, for a company called Racine Hardware. He was just the salesman. He didn't own anything. 4 years later, in 1886, he scraped together the money and bought the flooring division outright. And I want you to appreciate the scale we're starting at here, because it's almost comically small. 4 employees. That's the entire company. And the first year's profit was under $300. One account puts it at $268.27. That is the seed of a $30 billion dynasty. A guy, 3 co-workers, and less money than a modern car payment. But here's where luck and attention collide, which is basically the origin story of every great business. Samuel kept getting the same question from customers. How do I take care of these floors? Back then, people used shellac, which had an infuriating habit of building up in layers and then peeling off in ugly sheets. So Samuel, borrowing an old European trick of waxing wooden floors, mixed up his own product and called it Johnson's Prepared Paste Wax. And he did something smart. He gave a can of it away free with every floor he sold. A little bonus. A nice touch. And then the strangest thing started happening. People who had never bought a Johnson floor started writing to him, calling him, asking if they could just buy the wax, not the floors, just the can. Samuel Curtis Johnson had accidentally created a product more valuable than his entire actual business. And to his enormous credit, he noticed. He started advertising the wax nationally, and sales took off so hard that within a few decades, the flooring side looked like a rounding error. By 1917, they killed it off completely. The last shipment of parquet flooring went out the door, and the company never looked back. They weren't a flooring company that sold wax anymore. They were a wax company that used to sell floors. But turning that product into a dynasty took a second Johnson, and he built something far more durable than wax, a philosophy. Speaking of what a reputation built on trust can quietly compound into, there's a program someone on our team has been curious about called the Billionaire Brain Wave. It's a simple 7-minute audio built around theta brainwave research. The deep focus brain state links to where big creative ideas come from. You put on headphones once a day, usually with your morning coffee, and that's the whole routine. It's a one-time $39. It comes with bonus guides on money habits and investing basics, and there's a 90-day money-back guarantee. So testing it costs you nothing if it's not for you. If you're watching on your TV, pause and scan the QR code on screen with your phone camera, or tap the first link in the description. Now, back to the next generation taking the wheel. Chapter 3. The goodwill of people is the only enduring thing. Samuel's son, Herbert Fisk Johnson Sr., became a partner in 1906, which is the moment the company officially became S.C. Johnson & Son, the name it still carries today. And Herbert turned out to be the one who installed the operating system the family has run on ever since. He was a traveler and a relentless relationship guy. He personally went out and founded the company's first international operation in England in 1914, then Australia in 1917, then Canada in 1920. This at a time when a Wisconsin wax company going global was a genuinely wild idea. But his real legacy wasn't the map. It was what he did with the people who worked for him, and the timing of it is what makes it remarkable. In 1900, when the standard American labor arrangement was roughly show up or starve, this company started giving its employees paid vacations. It was one of the first companies in the entire United States to do it. Then, in 1917, with about 200 people on the payroll, Herbert launched a profit-sharing program, one of the first in the country. And this wasn't a token gesture. That first year, 193 employees split $31,250 between them. In 1917, money. He added group life insurance the same year. His reasoning was blunt and, for the era, borderline radical. He believed everybody who helped build the success deserved a piece of it. And he summed the whole philosophy up in a single line that the family has basically treated as scripture ever since. In a speech, Herbert said the goodwill of people is the only enduring thing in any business. Everything else, the products, the factories, the profits, comes and goes. Goodwill compounds. Now, cynically, you could call that a nice slogan. Except they kept paying for it over and over in ways that cost real money and made no short-term sense. Herbert died suddenly on Valentine's Day, 1928, leaving a company with $5 million in sales and 500 employees. And it landed on his 28-year-old son, 8 months before the stock market collapsed and took the entire world economy down with it. Chapter 4. The 28-year-old who flew a seaplane into the jungle. So picture being Herbert Jr. You're 28. Your father just died with no warning. You've inherited a company with 500 families depending on it. And within a year, the Great Depression arrives and starts strip mining the American economy. The damage was brutal. Sales cratered by roughly 40%, dropping to under $3 million by 1933. And here's where the family started doing the thing that defines them. Because a normal, rational, cost-cutting response to losing 40% of your revenue is to slash everything to the bone. H.F. Jr. did the opposite. He poured money into research and development in the middle of the collapse, and it produced a self-polishing floor wax called Glow Coat that became a genuine hit. Then, in 1934, still in the Depression, still bleeding, he established a pension plan for employees. A pension. During the Depression. There is no Wall Street analyst in history who would have signed off on that. But the truly unhinged move was still coming, and it started with a supply problem. The magic ingredient in Johnson wax was carnaúba, a wax that coats the leaves of a single palm tree that grows in the punishing dry country of northeastern Brazil. The Brazilians called it the tree of life. And the harvesting process was medieval. Workers whipped the palm leaves across a stand embedded with knives to shred them, then beat the shreds to knock the wax powder loose. One person could process about 1,000 leaves a day, and roughly half of what came off was contaminated with debris. Supply was unreliable, and HF was worried the whole thing could dry up. Most executives would send a purchasing agent. H.F. Johnson Jr. climbed into a twin-engine Sikorsky S-38 amphibious plane, one of those beautiful, ungainly flying boats. And on September 24, 1935, he took off from Wisconsin and flew 15,000 miles to Fortaleza, Brazil, with a crew of 5 and a botanist from Chicago's Field Museum. The CEO of the company personally flew a seaplane into the Brazilian backcountry to go find better trees. And it worked. They established a research center called Raposa in 1937 to study and cultivate the palm and modernize the harvest. He said afterward that the trip changed his life. And the story of that plane has an ending that's almost too good. After the expedition, it was sold off to a petroleum company, and in 1938 it crashed into the sea off Indonesia and vanished. Decades later, in 1998, H.F.'s son Sam, then 70 years old, had a replica built from scratch and flew the entire route to Brazil again, alongside his own 2 sons, 3 generations of Johnsons in the same cockpit chasing the same ghost. And in 2006, the family finally located the original wreck, lying in 90 feet of water off the coast of Papua. They dove down and left a granite plaque on it that reads, "I am Karnauba. My true home is not this bay, but the hearts of all who love adventure." That's the kind of family this is. But when H.F. came home from Brazil in 1936, he was a changed man, and he immediately made a decision that nearly ate the entire company's budget. Chapter 5. The building that ate the budget. In 1936, H.F. Johnson Jr. decided his company needed a new headquarters, and rather than hiring a sensible firm to put up a sensible office block, he hired Frank Lloyd Wright, at that point a brilliant, difficult, career-slumping genius who was famous for going wildly over budget and treating clients like inconvenient obstacles. It went exactly how you'd expect, and it's one of the great stories in American architecture. Wright hated the location, a grim industrial patch of Racine, and pushed Johnson to move the whole company somewhere greener. Johnson flatly refused. He wasn't abandoning his hometown. So Wright's solution was to build a headquarters with essentially no windows, sealing the outside world out entirely and, in his words, recreating nature on the inside instead. The centerpiece was the Great Workroom, held up by columns Wright called dendriform, tree-shaped, though everyone calls them lily pads because they're just 9 inches across at the floor and then blossom out to 18.5 feet wide at the ceiling. They look like a forest of concrete mushrooms holding up the sky, and they are genuinely beautiful. There was one problem. The Wisconsin Industrial Commission looked at the plans, decided those spindly little columns could not possibly hold a roof up, and refused to approve the building. So in 1937, Wright staged a public spectacle. He had a test column built and started piling weight on it in front of a crowd, with H.F. Johnson himself standing there watching. The requirement was 12 tons. They loaded 12. Then another 12. Then more, and more, and more, until the column was carrying 60 tons, 5 times what the state demanded, and still standing. They got their permit. And then the bill came. The building was budgeted at $200,000. By the time it was finished in 1939, with 43 miles of Pyrex glass tubing instead of windows, and the distinction of being the first fully air-conditioned office building in the United States, the cost had ballooned to somewhere around $1 million. Johnson described the experience in a line I love. First, Frank Lloyd Wright was working for me, then we were working together, and finally, I was working for him. Life magazine called the finished building the greatest innovation since the skyscraper. And then, because apparently he learned nothing, Johnson hired Wright again to build a 14-story research tower, the tallest thing Wright had ever built, with every floor cantilevered off a central core like branches off a tree trunk. It's stunning. It also had no fire escapes, and it got shut down in 1982 for safety. A public company would have fired this man twice. Instead, those buildings became the single most recognizable thing about the brand, and the next generation was about to prove the family could take an even bigger swing. Chapter 6. How a wax company took over your entire house. For 70 years, this was a wax company. Floor wax, furniture wax, car wax, that was the identity. Then H.F. Jr.'s son, Sam Johnson, showed up and blew the whole thing open. Sam's opening move as a young man in the business was pushing the company into something that had nothing to do with wax at all: bug spray. In 1955, they launched Raid, and it was the first major departure from the wax business in the company's history. It worked spectacularly, and that cracked something open in the family's imagination, because if a wax company could sell insecticide, what else could it sell? The answer, over the next few years, was Glade air freshener, Pledge furniture polish, and Off insect repellent. 4 brands that are still sitting in tens of millions of homes right now, all launched in roughly a decade. Sam took over as president in 1966 after his father had a stroke, added the chairman's title in 1967, and spent the next 3 decades turning a Midwestern wax business into a global consumer products machine. He pushed into outdoor recreation gear, which eventually became Johnson Outdoors. Sales crossed $1 billion by 1978. And then in the 90s, he went shopping with serious money. In 1992, SC Johnson bought the Dracket Company for $1.15 billion, and in one stroke acquired Windex, Drano, and Vanish. Then in 1998, they bought Dow brands from Dow Chemical and picked up Ziploc, Saran, Fantastic, and Scrubbing Bubbles. Think about what that shopping spree actually did. In 6 years, a family wax company from Wisconsin bought its way into being the default answer for cleaning your windows, unclogging your drain, scrubbing your tub, and storing your leftovers. That's why your kitchen looks the way it does. That's why you can't get away from them. But for all the empire building, the thing Sam Johnson worried about most wasn't a competitor or a market. It was something that had nearly torn his own family apart a generation earlier, and he was determined it would never happen again. Chapter 7. The feud he refused to repeat. Here's the part of the story the company doesn't put on the tour. Back in HF Jr.'s generation, there was a fight. A genuine ownership struggle between HF and his sister over control of the family business. It was eventually settled with a 60-40 split that handed HF control. Everyone moved on. But Sam Johnson watched that happen, and it clearly haunted him because he made a vow that he would do whatever it took to make sure a rift like that never fractured the family or the company again. And the way he kept that vow is genuinely clever. Sam had 4 children, and the classic dynasty mistake is to make them all fight over one crown. So instead of handing the whole empire to one heir and leaving 3 resentful siblings circling, he divided the kingdom into separate thrones. Fisk Johnson got SC Johnson and Son, the core company, the household brands. Kurt Johnson got the commercial cleaning business that became Diversey. Helen Johnson Leipold got Johnson Outdoors, the publicly traded recreation company, and later the chairmanship of Johnson Financial Group. And Winnie Johnson Marquardt took the reins of the family's philanthropic foundation. 4 children, 4 domains, nobody reporting to a sibling. He engineered the piece as deliberately as his father engineered a wax formula. Sam died in 2004, and the man who inherited the flagship is one of the more unusual CEOs in American business. Fisk Johnson holds 5 separate degrees from Cornell: a bachelor's in chemistry and physics, a master's in engineering, a master's in physics, an MBA, and a doctorate in physics. The man running the company that makes Glade plugins is a working physicist with a PhD. He didn't parachute into the top job either. He joined in 1987 as a marketing associate, became chairman in 2000 and CEO in 2004. He's a scuba diver, a pilot, holds patents of his own, and in 2017 he and the company gave $150 million to Cornell, the largest single gift in the history of that campus. Between him and his 3 siblings, the family still owns the majority of the whole operation outright. But being untouchable by Wall Street doesn't make you untouchable by everybody, and the 5th generation walked into a fight the first 4 never had to face. Chapter 8. The fight over what's actually in the bottle. Here's where the halo gets complicated, and it's worth being honest about, because the modern era has been rough on a company whose entire identity is trust. Start with Green List. SC Johnson built an internal system for rating the environmental impact of its ingredients and started putting a green list seal on products like Windex. The intention was real. The underlying program actually won a US Presidential Green Chemistry Challenge Award, drove tens of millions of pounds of volatile organic compounds out of their formulas, and pushed hormone-disrupting phthalates out of their fragrances. But consumers in California and Wisconsin sued, arguing the seal looked exactly like a certification from a neutral outside group when in fact SC Johnson had invented it themselves. The company settled and agreed to stop using the logo in that form. To his credit, Fisk Johnson didn't hide behind lawyers about it. He said in retrospect they could have done a better job being transparent and clearer about what the label actually meant, and that when you get out in front of an issue, you don't always get it completely right. And the pressure hasn't let up. Class actions have challenged whether Windex should have been marketed as non-toxic, given some of the chemicals in it. In September 2025, the city of Philadelphia sued the company, along with a major bakery group, alleging that recycling symbols on Ziploc bags and similar plastic film misled people into thinking the material could go in their curbside bin when the city's system can't actually process it. Other suits over Ziploc and microplastics have run into trouble, with one California case finding the scientific basis for the claims insufficient. So it's genuinely mixed. Both things are true at once. This is a company that has spent decades voluntarily pulling chemicals out of its products ahead of regulators, and it's a company that keeps getting accused of overselling exactly how clean it has become. But here's the payoff, and it's the reason the title of this video is literally true rather than just a nice line. Look back at every defining decision this family ever made. Paid vacations in 1900, profit sharing in 1917, a pension plan in the middle of the Great Depression, a CEO flying a seaplane 15,000 miles into Brazil to find better palm trees, a headquarters that blew through 5 times its budget, and then a second right building on top of it. None of that survives a shareholder vote. Not one of those decisions makes it past a board of outside investors demanding better numbers this quarter. Every single thing that makes SC Johnson interesting only happened because there was nobody to ask for permission. 140 years, 5 generations, brands in nearly every home on Earth, roughly $30 billion in family wealth. And not one share for sale at any price. Herbert Johnson said back in the 1920s that the goodwill of people is the only enduring thing in any business. 5 generations later, his family is still the loudest possible argument that he was right. If stories about the families and empires that built their fortunes by refusing to play by Wall Street's rules are what brought you here, subscribe to Global Status, and we'll keep delivering them. See you in the next one.